Hi, everybody. My name is Sean McDade. I'm founder and CEO of Peoplemetrics. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm joined by my colleague, who you may have heard from just a couple minutes ago, Kirk Lobauer.
Hello.
Hey, it's so great to be here. We are going to be presenting some findings from a recent study that we did around the patient support services being delivered in the rheumatoid arthritis therapeutic category to a bunch of patients. And it's great to be here today. We'll have some polling questions, so stay tuned on that. So we're going to try to keep this as interactive and as interesting as possible. Keep in mind, there's no need to take notes or take pictures of the screen because we're going to have a recording of this available, and we'll be sending it to everybody. And why don't we get right to it, Kirk?
All right.
Just real quick about Peoplemetrics. If you haven't heard of Peoplemetrics, we're a company that helps pharmaceutical companies measure the patient's experience largely around patient support services, either being offered in-house or through hubs. And we help drive adherence, especially around the onboarding phase of a product, as well as helping pharmaceutical companies deliver better patient outcomes. We have a software platform, which you're actually looking at right now. The entire webinar is going to be delivered on our software platform, where we are delivering real-time results from patient experiences to pharmaceutical companies every day. And these include actionable insights. And we've also been doing this work around patient experience, especially in patient support services, for a number of years. Kirk, I think it's been 5 years now that we've been doing this.
Absolutely.
And I have written a book called Listen or Die, and that was more about general best practices around the customer experience across a number of industries. And some of you may have even received this book. We've sent out a few copies over the last year or so. And there's a lot of lessons that apply to pharmaceutical companies from that book, but there's so much demand and interest in the work we've been doing around measuring the patient experience for patient support services that I'm working on a second book that's tentatively titled Pharma CX Secrets. And these are specific strategies, some of which you'll learn today, to create a great patient experience from a pharmaceutical company perspective. Again, this is a lot around patient support services. And before we begin, I'd urge everyone who is at a pharmaceutical company who is responsible for this to think about it in a mindset like you are delivering an experience to a guest at a hotel or someone who's calling in at a contact center or call center on a traditional customer experience industry. That's what the patients that you're interacting with are expecting. And the services you're delivering to them are incredibly valuable, and there's amazing investment being put into this space. And measuring it and managing it and improving it is going to be something that I think and Peoplemetrics thinks will be really key to the future. And we're going to give you like a sneak peek within one therapeutic area today. And I'm really excited to share the results with you.
All right.
And here are some of the clients we work with. And our goal from this study and this webinar is to identify what defines the best patient support services that are currently being offered by pharmaceutical companies, in this case, in the rheumatoid arthritis category. And we will be revealing these companies later, specifically who is doing the best job. But first, a little background.
End of the call, yes. As Sean said, I'm Kirk Lobauer. I was the analyst for this study, so I'm very familiar with the data we'll be running through today. And essentially how we achieve this goal of trying to identify who's the best in this space is we reached out to 404 rheumatoid arthritis patients to ask a few key categories as to us what makes the best. One is awareness. Are they aware of the services being provided? Two is utilization. Are they using these? And what is their overall experience? Are they satisfied with these services that they receive? There are a number of medications that we did include in this study. Anyone that is included here is on treatment, specifically on one of the treatments that you see listed here. And a few of these will be mentioned later on as we do break a few of these scores out by medication specifically. Now, with the audience that we heard from, it is a pretty broad audience, a number of kind of folks across a range of ages from 18 all the way up to, of course, as it is rheumatoid arthritis, skewing to 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 or older. A length of time on diagnosis, all the way from less than 1 year up to 11 or more years, and then a mix of genders here as well. So a pretty broad base that we are speaking to.
Now, awareness, that's the first step in understanding patient support services that are going to be available to a patient. And, we have looked into this over the years, and there's not a lot of data on what percentage of patients are aware of this, why are they aware of it, who are they hearing it from, et cetera. And we're going to dig into this. But before we do, we have, I believe, our first polling question. And I want, if you could take just a few seconds and answer this question: what percentage of patients do you think are aware of patient support services being offered by pharmaceutical companies? And there's a few options there. Zero, not many, 0 to 24, 25 to 49, 50 to 74, or 75 to 100. So please answer that, and we will give you the actual percentage in a second. Okay, let's close it. All right, so most of you said not a lot of awareness. And in fact, a lot of the data before this study would indicate that it would be in that 0 to 24, but I think we may have a little bit of a surprise here, Kirk.
All right, moving down to our overall awareness. When we ask patients, are they familiar with support services offered by the pharmaceutical company? 52% of them said yes, they are aware of these services, so just over half. Now, we do see that this awareness varies widely depending on the patient's medication. So across a number of those we listed there at the top, we see it can go as high as 63% all the way down to 46%, depending on the medication. So while it's good, exactly as Sean said, this has been lower in the past. We're seeing this number on the rise, but just because it's on the rise doesn't mean it's on the rise at your company. This is work that clearly has to be put in if you want to see that number go up.
Yeah, it is encouraging though to see over 50%. These numbers that we had seen in the past were in the teens. So there's definitely more awareness that these types of services are available.
Now, within that awareness, it's not just awareness of the overall offering. It is awareness of what is being provided by these companies. Now, generally, when we think of the offerings that come with the patient support services, they tend to fall in three major categories. The core aspect is financial support, finding out your insurance coverage, copay assistance, helping with prior authorization and appeals. The second aspect is educational support to varying degrees, either learning about rheumatoid arthritis or learning about the medication, and some connections to either advocacy or patient organizations. And then there's more physical access of just your onboarding, helping with free samples, finding pharmacies, and then help with access to nurses.
So Kirk, the people who are aware of patient support services, are they equally aware of all of these different support services that are being offered?
Unfortunately not, and we see that varies very much as well. So the highest awareness comes from that core offering of financial assistance. So these core ones of insurance verification especially, that's where we see support the highest, then followed by some of these educational aspects, helping learning about rheumatoid arthritis, then finally the lowest awareness around those immediate physical access pieces.
Interesting. And it looks like from the utilization chart right next to it, that's mirroring awareness more or less.
Exactly. So when patients are aware of a service, that is when they use it.
So it's the financial piece that's being used the most at this point.
Precisely. They understand that these are ultimately financial assistance programs, and they're less aware of the other offerings that tend to be provided.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, as far as they understand to some degree these are the services, that's not necessarily exactly the same as knowing kind of where did you hear about these and who offers these services.
Right.
And so we do ask these as well. And what we find is that patients, when they first hear of these services, it is most often from a healthcare provider or from their doctor.
So that then they hear about them from the doctor. So HCP communication is still critical and is the linchpin to get to increasing awareness of patient support services.
Absolutely. Of course, these are patient programs. You have access to patients to some degree, but they learn about it from their HCP. So you want to make sure that the doctors themselves are aware of the full suite of offerings.
And it looks like they even think the HCPs are offering the services.
Certainly, there's a lot of awareness to increase, not just in what is being provided, but who am I getting these from? They are told about these services from the doctor, and most of them then follow up and think, these are services that are coming from my doctors. This is where they hear it from. Fortunately, that's the second place that they think that they receive it from is from their actual pharmaceutical company. So there is slightly broader awareness that this comes from pharmaceutical, but most patients, their initial perception is that it comes from the doctor themselves.
So communication is key to the HCP, and it sounds like a clarity of actually who is providing these services is another thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
All right. So the overall experience of patients with patient support services, we know half of the patients are aware of them. Now the question is, what's the overall experience? But first, why is the overall experience that patients have important right now? And the way that we often measure the customer experience is something called Net Promoter Score. And this is simply a calculation of people who would promote a product or service, those 9s and 10s on the chart, minus the people who would not, which are the detractors, the 0 to 6. And there's a net score. It's simply the promoters minus the detractors. For patient support services, we ask a question around how satisfied are you with these services. Net Promoter Score is typically asked around, would you recommend these services? Because recommend isn't appropriate for patients who have a specific kind of medication and treatment program. We talk about this in terms of satisfaction. But the segments are still useful, and we're reporting on this way, right, Kirk? And we're offering a net satisfaction score with these segments.
Certainly, and this is a metric. This bucketing of detractors, passive, and promoters, exactly as you said, that is very common in the customer space. And for those who measure it in the pharmaceutical or patient space, it's more common there as well, as we're seeing more measurement there. The reason is because it is very essential to be able to say we are segmenting our patients based on how satisfied they are with these services. This is a quick and easy way to say, here's how we make them satisfied, here's how we make them dissatisfied, and then build your learnings from there.
Great. So we're going to be seeing some net satisfaction scores in a minute. But first, we have a polling question. Are you currently measuring the satisfaction of your patients with the patient support services that are being offered? And we have 3 options here: yes, no, or we don't offer patient support services. Now, even if you're using a partner hub, I'd like you to think about, are they measuring the satisfaction of the patients in terms of the support services? And are you getting that information? So that would be a yes. Or a no, in case you're not measuring that. Let's close the poll and see where we got. Okay, 46% no, 38% yes, and 15% do not offer. Very interesting. So I would say this, measuring this satisfaction is super important, and we're going to see why in a minute. But first, Kirk is going to take us through a few other things.
All right, so starting with that Net Promoter Score we just went through, what we learned is that about half of the patients that we spoke to are promoters. They are those who are most satisfied with the patient services they receive. Then we have about 30%, 28 there are in that middle passives, and then 20% are in that really red highlighted dissatisfied or detractor column. When we do that net satisfaction calculation, which is the 51 minus the 20, we get to an ultimate net satisfaction of 31.
You may look at that and think, wow, that's not very high. But within traditional, we call it customer experience industries like hotels and telecommunications and financial services, that would be a solid score. It isn't the highest we've ever seen, but it certainly isn't the lowest. The top brands will be delivering 50 or 60 on this number. But 31, I would call it a very solid score that has room to grow. You say, Kirk.
Exactly. And something that's worth noting from that just net satisfaction score, it isn't your traditional 0 to 100, percent. It does go from -100 to 100. So that is a wide band. It goes all the way up. And so that's a solid baseline, but we know that we're not there at best in class yet. So there's still a lot of room to grow.
We have seen negative scores for certain industries in the past, and that's actually in my book, Listen or Die, in chapter 5 or 6. We have all sorts of benchmarks for different industries on Net Promoter Score, and some of which are near zero, if not negative.
Precisely. And then for anyone who, if you're scratching your head on that one, of course, taking it back to the calculation, if you're below 0, that just means you have more detractors than you have promoters. So it's good to see that on the whole, you're delivering a successful experience. That's why we're in the positive here.
Great. Why does this matter, Kirk?
So why does this matter? Ultimately, when we ask what is the purpose of patient support services, it's really to make sure that patients feel prepared to begin their treatment. We do this kind of measurement across a number of patient support services, and that's a survey question we often ask at the end of any of these services. Do you feel prepared to begin treatment? Since that is the core delivery. We asked that of the patients within this survey, and what we found is that when we ask them, are you prepared to begin treatment? 84% of them say that they feel prepared. 16% of them say they're not prepared. That's pretty good. We do want to make sure that that 16% goes away, but satisfied patients feel more prepared to begin treatment. So it is a big predictor. If you fall into that detractor category, you're about a 50% chance that you will feel prepared to begin treatment. If we're able to move you up to a passive, that treatment preparedness jumps significantly to 87%. And then if you're a promoter, you're just about universally going to feel that you're prepared to begin treatment.
So what we're saying here, Kirk, is the patients who are having superior experiences with the patient support services delivered are the ones who are prepared for treatment. And if they didn't, meaning they're detractors, it's a coin flip whether they're prepared for treatment and whether they will indeed onboard onto a new medication.
Precisely. These are services that provide the fundamental goal of, do you feel prepared to begin treatment? So it's essential that if you're making the investment to actually provide this service, that it's achieving that goal, and satisfaction is the way you can tell.
And when we do this for our clients, Kirk, in general, the first touch point they're looking at is onboarding, right? So
that's correct.
Getting patients onboarded, new patients onto a new medication, and offering these support services then, which talks about preparedness.
Absolutely. That is, for many of these patients, that's a core milestone of, I understand this is a new medication. I know how it fits in with my insurance. I know how it fits in down with my daily life. You do ultimately want to build onto that of either 6 months on therapy, 12 months on therapy, but onboarding is the most common starting point.
So it's preparedness and then, of course, adherence over time, which is why we often reach out at 6 months and 12 months as well after onboarding.
Precisely.
Great.
So with that, when we're thinking of satisfaction is important, but it's not just at that holistic level, it is for those specific services.
Right. So it's things that are being offered by the patient support services teams that really dictate whether their experience is good or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when we look at these specific services, again, just as a quick recap, here's what we're talking about when we mean that. It's financial, educational, and physical access components. What we see is that high satisfaction is really driven by those core financial support elements, especially around copay assistance. That's where we see the highest satisfaction. They understand that it's a financial access program, and that's where they're most satisfied to receive. The lower satisfaction, similar to awareness and utilization, it kind of goes down the scale, where if you're not aware or not, well, these less utilized aspects, there's also lower satisfaction for them. But really one of the lowest is the educational elements. That's where they rate lower, and it really is a point of improvement from what we see. Why we know that is a point for improvement, it's not just here in the scores we see, but it's what patients are talking about when they provide their satisfaction. For these most satisfied patients, these promoters who also then are rating very highly on this copay assistance, they understand that this is a fundamental offering. and it helps them afford their medication, and they speak to that within the comments they provide.
It sounds like the financial assistance, Kirk, is the absolute key price of admission type service being offered. It's vital to making this be a value and a good experience for the patients. But is it enough just to offer that?
It is not. When we see patients who are dissatisfied, they're not really talking about the copay assistance. They're talking back to these educational aspects. Dissatisfied patients, they're talking about the lack of educational resources and then turning to other sources when help is unavailable. So when we speak on education, it is something that's more holistic. This education can mean a lot of things, either about rheumatoid arthritis, it can mean about the medication itself. Of course, patient support services are limited in what they're able to discuss. But ultimately, what we see here is patients are seeking out information. They want this information, and they're going to get it somewhere. For instance, we see here around Facebook support groups. What they're expecting of the patient support services that they interact with is, even if you can't give me the information, give me some guidance into where I can get it.
Right. So it sounds like financial support, price of admission, gets us to a certain level of satisfaction and experience. In order to truly get to that next level, to be a promoter, to be someone who feels like the experience was exceptional, then it's other things like this, like these educational resources, either provided directly or, like you said, access. This is where you find that type of information.
Precisely. And that really is the core thing. With being a promoter, of course, this is a tough scale where that's just the 9 to 10. So that's someone who's very satisfied. So it's not just, can you deliver the base services? That's, how do I differentiate? And so this is how we're seeing folks differentiate.
Very interesting.
Okay. This is really, we ask patients as well, why do they enroll? And it really is highlighted there as well. When patients first enroll in their patient services, the reason that they're enrolling isn't necessarily for financial assistance. That's not top of mind for them when they're first enrolling. It's about education. This is either following a new diagnosis or following a change in treatment. So they're most focused on these various educational aspects. And so that's where we need to make sure we're delivering, as that's where they feel the drop currently.
And so they're enrolling because of those educational and probably support and making them feel like, you know what, I can handle this.
Precise.
You know, there's information out there. There's potentially support groups out there that that can help me with this.
Yes, and they need this to be a part of that support network.
And that's of value, even if they're not 100% satisfied with it. So that's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
We think. Yeah. Okay, great.
So there's certainly some room to improve. One of the very encouraging pieces of information that we see, regardless of the services offered, most folks are very satisfied with the amount of communication that they receive. So how frequently they hear from or interact with their patient support services. We do ask if they get too much communication, just the right amount of communication, or not enough. And we do see, and here I can blow this out so we can really see it here, that they're overwhelmingly satisfied getting just the right amount of communication with the support that they receive.
But going back to an earlier finding, they're just not sure where that communication is coming from, right?
That's correct.
They're thinking that potentially it's the HCP, it's not the pharma company or the partner hub. That's another kind of challenge.
Yes, you need to make sure that they understand. Ultimately, if we want to improve, they should understand who is making these improvements and who they're speaking with. It's back again.
Great.
And let's bring ourselves on down. Oop.
So there's a level of, okay, we know how many are aware, we know now how many are satisfied, we know what's driving the satisfaction, but there are different models, right, of patient support services, not just being whether you're insourcing it or outsourcing it, it's what's the delivery mechanism for those patients. And is it a high touch model that you would have potentially with some rare disease offerings? Is it a low touch model where you have more mass market products, or is there some sort of hybrid?
Certainly, and this is something that we wanted to understand around how the experience that they're receiving, how the patients perceive that. Exactly as you were saying, there are two main methods, approaches, either low touch or high touch, for how patient support services tend to be delivered. If it's a low touch model, it tends to be either a website or there's an online patient portal that is being provided, or potentially there's a mobile app if you really want to invest in this space. For high touch, it tends to be there's a call center if that is a kind of more mass market product, as you're saying, and then in that rare disease space, more commonly what you'll find is an actual dedicated case manager who is assigned to a patient.
Right. So these are essentially, if you think about it, if you think about a journey map for patient support services, these are going to be some big touch points that you would interact with patients and provide services and support. And there could be combinations of them, or there could be kind of one predominant one.
Precisely. And this is going to be very important, as this is ultimately how they interact with your services. If you fall in, especially if you deliver a hybrid model, if you fall on any one of these, that means you're failing in that core delivery of your service.
And practically speaking, if we just want to think about measuring and managing the patient experience, this is where it happens. So if you are offering these services through these channels, our suggestion would be to measure the experience from each one of these channels and making sure that it's as exceptional as possible, whether it is a low-touch digital experience or a high-touch case manager experience. It's about the experience, and measuring that experience systematically and often is definitely best practice.
Precisely. And so to that, we look to measure the satisfaction of folks who interact with these channels. And what we found, satisfaction is generally high across these.
You jumped the gun. We have one more poll question. Okay. What channels are you investing in today for your patient support services? Interesting. And there's dedicated case managers, there's the call center, website, /online portal, mobile app, or none of the above. And this is multi-select, so you could select more than one of these. Give a couple more seconds for our quick poll. This is our final poll. We will have an opportunity for some audience Q&A in a minute, so there'll be other chances to interact, but this is the last poll. Okay, why don't we see what the results are from that? Okay, call center, number 1, digital, mobile app, and dedicated case managers. Wow, that's great. That's nice to see them all represented.
A broad mix there. As I was saying just a little bit before the poll, we measure satisfaction across all these. Satisfaction is generally high. What we see is that it's very consistent across case managers, for the app, and for the portal. Satisfaction is generally in the high 70s. A lot of folks we see on the call are using call center, and unfortunately, that's where satisfaction is the lowest and where there's that most opportunity to improve.
And that's like what we see in other industries too, that call centers, contact centers can be challenging to deliver good experiences. And what are some of the factors that we're seeing that contribute to that?
Certainly can be. When we ask these call center patients, what is it that they are seeing, the negative comments from them really speak to difficulty contacting the call centers, lengthy resolution time, and just a general need for more training. We see a few of those comments there, which really come down to fundamental call center offerings.
This is what I'd call customer experience one-on-one type things, like being able to get through, not be on hold. The training is more complex in this case than, say, a call center for a bank, right, or a telecommunications company, because you have to be knowledgeable about what you're talking about as a contact center person.
You have to be knowledgeable, and there may be a limit to what you're allowed to discuss as well. So there's a number of complexities to this space specifically, but it does speak to, of course, what we saw earlier in that their number one thing that you're looking to get is education, is learning. And so the fact that we're seeing here training really speaks to a need to deliver on that. Okay. So just as a quick recap of everything we've discussed so far, everything we're guiding towards really is around this treatment preparedness. We want to make sure patients at the conclusion of these interactions feel they're prepared to begin treatment. And it's how we measure success. Either you are or you aren't prepared to begin treatment. And we see how these really are the predictors of that. If you're not satisfied, that means you don't feel prepared. If you don't feel that you've gotten that copay assistance, you're going to see a major kind of change in your scores. If you don't feel, especially, that you've been given any information around your treatment or your medication, if you're not satisfied with the channels that you use, or if you're not getting that right amount of communication, all these things are going to have a major impact on whether or not you ultimately feel prepared to begin that treatment.
So at a high level, Kirk, what we're saying is those patients who have had a great experience with patient support services are much, much more likely to be prepared for treatment. And the differences in these numbers are pretty stark.
Precisely.
Like, these are different experiences people are having. And that's what patient and customer experience is all about, is trying to maintain a consistent experience across multiple patients, right? And measuring and managing the patient experience is a way to get there.
Exactly. Just as you need consistency across these channels, you need consistency within a channel, and measurement is how you ensure that happens. So.
Okay, Kirk, who is the best in patient support services in the RA category?
All right, we've come to that fun part.
Should we do a drum roll? Almost.
Let's go on over to our who's the best. And what we see, Humira Complete and Enbrel Support are the top rated programs in our study. Here we have those satisfaction segments that we viewed before, our detractor, capacitors, and promoters. Humira and Enbrel coming there at the top with both the highest amount of promoters and then the lowest amount of detractors, leading them to being the best in patient support services.
Yes. And some of the other brands seem like they're doing a very solid job also. There's always room for improvement on all of them, but it's just getting this data, I think, is really interesting and important.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me take you through what we would consider the 3 key takeaways from this webinar. Takeaway number 1 is that patient support services matters. It's impacting preparedness, which impacts likelihood to onboard. You really need to get that experience right, because when you get it right, you have a much better chance not only to onboard patients, but to have them adhere over time and have better patient outcomes, which is why we all know that's the most important thing to everyone. So that's the first big thing. The investments that you and your pharmaceutical companies are making in this area matter. They're wise, and they're making an impact. Second, financial support is needed. It's the price of admission. It has to be there for a positive patient experience with patient support services, but it's not enough. Think of it as the entryway to having a great experience, an entryway to becoming a promoter, an entryway to being prepared for treatment, but it isn't enough. What is needed in addition are educational resources, support groups, information that people can find to make them feel comfortable about their disease state, feeling comfortable about kind of what they can do, what are they going to have in front of them long term, and supporting them in that way too will get them to much higher levels of satisfaction and being ultimately that 9 or 10 on that scale. Okay, so we're at, yes, we've got some time for some audience Q&A. So why don't we allow that to happen? Put any questions you have in the, there's a box or something here. Yes. Okay. All right. Here's one question. How about this one, Kirk? How often should we be measuring the patient experience in patient support services? That's a question we get all the time. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple approaches to it. If you've never done any measurement in this area, it's often good to go out to all of your patients mm-hmm. and see kind of what their overall experience has been from the very beginning, kind of like what we've been doing here for this RA study. You've been on many of those types of programs.
I sure have, and that is a common place to start. Ultimately, you want to know where to focus your efforts, like anything else. And so a great place when you're looking to get this patient measurement is let's ask all of our patients, regardless of where they are in their treatment journey, about their experiences within the support services we provide.
And of course, as after that, a typical approach would be identify a touch point that is the most common one. So if it's a rare disease type offering, it would be potentially the case manager, right, interaction. And you measure that consistently over time with every interaction or every 10th interaction, or how many, depends on how much that would be.
Certainly, and that's, of course, gets back to that idea. You want to make sure that you're addressing kind of the bulk of your experience. So that's a great place to start, is in thinking, where are my patients interacting with me most often, and how can I improve that experience?
Okay, there's a question that says, this is an interesting one. How many patients do you need to talk to get sufficient information to act on? What is the N? So this is kind of a two-pronged answer to this. If you go out to everyone and you get kind of a representative sample of people responding at a kind of a high level, you're fine in understanding kind of what percentages of your patients are satisfied, and what your net satisfaction score is, and kind of what are the best offerings that you have and where are you falling short. But I think what's really interesting is if you identify a touch point, like a case manager or even a digital asset, even an N of 1 is enough to take action on, because you can, depending on the circumstances, follow up with individual patients if they're not getting the experience that they need, and course correct with them. And we've done that with clients, right?
Absolutely, and that's generally how, with our clients, we describe patient experience work. Is there's two components of it. There's a holistic component, and then there's an individual component. Holistically, it depends on the size of your patient base and what insights you're trying to draw before you know what's a reasonable amount. But at an individual level, where a lot of our clients get value is they just hone in on, I've gotten one response that was from that I can tie to one case manager, and then we can have that for just a coaching conversation. So you work to get as many responses as you can, but regardless of how many you get, you can always make sure that you're following up with whoever had the call, and then with the patient to make sure that they know how to stay on treatment.
Okay, well, the questions are just coming in, Kirk. Here's one. How should I measure my patient support services if they're all digital and there's no human interaction? What happens there? What do you suggest?
Well, if it is all digital, one, I would say, even beyond that question of how, it certainly is important. It's essential to do it. I think it's not all folks understand that value of, do I even do it in the first place? This is your representation of your patient support services. So you, of course, even if it is a digital only channel, you want to make sure that you have that out there. Now, how you do it, you want to make sure that you're reaching them where they are, so when they come onto your website, that you can either have a survey there, email them after the fact, and collect their feedback. Really specifically for our web surveys, it's around, of course, the website experience itself, to make sure that is it clear, does it provide everything they need, and take action from there.
Excellent. Here's a good question that I think we should touch on. Are you planning to do this type of study in the oncology space? If so, how do you include touch points like field reimbursement specialists, office managers, et cetera? And are you ranking vendors in that? To answer the first part of that question, we've not done this in oncology, but it's certainly on the list of future studies. And second is, it's a key question around who gets included in this type of measurement, Kirk? Is it just patients, or are there other stakeholders like field reimbursement reps and office managers, et cetera?
Yes, we do want to make sure with our studies, certainly for patient support services, we reach out to patients. We also reach out to HCPs because they are an essential part of that as well. For someone like field reimbursement directors, that is certainly a part of the experience, whether you're a patient or an HCP, and it's worth asking about. I think whether it's part of this study or if it's a study you're doing on your own, it's important you make sure you get that description very correct. A lot of times these lines are blurred for patients and HCPs. They're either speaking to a reimbursement director, speaking to a sales rep, they're speaking to a case manager, and so that is something that we try to measure, or that we measure with our clients, and we just make sure we're very precise in how we describe these individuals so that those distinctions are clear.
There's a question around, other than NPS, are there other known measures of satisfaction? NPS is one that a lot of different industries use, and it's sort of the standard of the overall kind of relationship you might have with a customer, or in this case, a patient. Just asking about satisfaction, like we did here, is another typical approach. Sometimes people ask about, specifically say, describe how your experience was, an exceptional experience versus to a disappointing experience. There's a question that is gaining a lot of traction around the effort that customers or patients need to put into the experience in order to get the result they need. This is often asked on contact center or call center type situations where, if the customer or patient feels like it was a tremendous amount of effort to extract the information they needed out of that contact center rep, either because they weren't knowledgeable, or they had to go to another rep who might have known the answer to the question. That's a really good question around effort. So the better answer on that, it was an easy experience that requires less effort. So it's the notion of a frictionless experience versus an experience full of friction. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants experiences full of friction, no matter where you are.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's a great point, because it really just gets to expectations. You want to measure their expectations. This is something that you saw earlier on, kind of before folks really understood that, is you would ask, how long did it take? And if it's something that, for instance, you're going to a bank and you're applying for a mortgage, it might take a long time, but that's fine because you understand it's going to take a long time. So you really want to get to, did it take longer than you expected? Did it take less time than you expected? Was it easier or harder than you expected it to be? Because that's really what you want to benchmark against, and what you want to make sure your metrics are getting to.
Kirk, here's one that is also, these are great questions, by the way. Thank you, audience. How effective are patient support programs beyond the financial access piece? Humira, for instance, provides longer-term nurse support, et cetera. So we talked about the financial piece being the price of admission, mm-hmm. right, for an experience that seems to be acceptable. Mm-hmm. And then there are a variety of other support services, like this longer-term nurse support that is a key stakeholder, right, in terms of this.
Yes, and that is within the study. We it didn't put too much focus on that in the presentation here today, but satisfaction with nursing support programs do tend to be higher. That was one of the higher scores, also in the 70s. Not quite as high as that core financial assistance, but on the whole, that satisfaction is quite high with that.
Interesting. Where should I start if I want to measure patient satisfaction with patient support services? I think we may have talked a little bit about this, mm-hmm. that often a great way to start is to go out to all of your patients at once and get what we call a baseline, mm-hmm. of where you are from a net satisfaction perspective and an overall experience, including all the different support services that are being offered. And then from there, really hone in on a regular measurement program around a specific touch point, depending if you have a high touch or low touch model.
Precisely. And it's a matter of, don't try to do it all at once. Pick something, understand what you need to do, and build on it from there. So that is why we tend to start with the baseline, understand where do we really need to focus, where are the most patients so we can get to them first. And so that often does mean starting with the call center and then perhaps building out from there to website, or building out from there onto the app. As all of these are touch points, you want to do kind of the most effective work first, but build out as everything is a reflection of how patients see you.
There was a question that said, how many waves of the study have we done and what trends do we indicate? This is the first wave of this study within rheumatoid arthritis. Trends, though, anecdotally show that awareness, based on previous research that we've seen, is definitely going up. What happens though, and when awareness goes up and utilization goes up, is expectations will go up. I talk a lot about this when I talk to pharmaceutical clients, that your patients are consumers of other brands within hospitality and within financial services and within digital, and they have certain expectations that they have based on their other kind of life. And when they get into these types of support services, while they're pleasantly surprised and love that they're available, their expectation on delivery then reverts back to what they experience every day in their lives. And so you'll see expectations, I feel, going up on the delivery of these services over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any thoughts on that? Sure.
It's something in the clients that we work with in the patient services space, they're aware of that. They understand that if you're calling a call center, you're comparing that to every other call center you've spoken with. And so a negative experience there, you think, why can't they be as easy as this experience here? So yes, trending, of course, within a space is important, but you need to understand that you're operating just in a broader context of that patient's day-to-day life and how do you fit into that life.
If they're outsourcing to a hub, does that mean that, Kirk, that the patient experience is the hub's problem?
Absolutely not. That is another thing where it's easy to kind of put boundaries on the responsibility. And that's one that we have seen, with hubs. It's also one that we've seen with that idea of, I just can't provide any information on, on this actual disease state itself, and kind of washing your hands of that. What makes folks really excel at this space is not when they say, this is as far as I can go and there's nothing I can do about it. It's to say, I understand that this is what patients expect of me. I need to do everything I can to measure and understand why they see this as our responsibility and deliver on it as best we can. So if it's a hub, that hub, when they're picking up the phone, they're acting as you, and they're saying that you're reaching this company. So you need to make sure you understand that experience.
Kirk, I don't know if we know the answer to this, but I'll throw it out there. Can you comment on the linkages between patient support programs and the actual delivery of the drug, i.e. at infusion sites? So I guess that gets down to preparedness and onboarding, right, and actually getting onto the program.
And it does. We don't have it specifically within this study, but that does get to what we were just speaking to with hubs. Of infusion centers are another one of those things where, when it comes to who are the folks that are just delivering an okay job versus those who are really excelling, when you take an interest in saying, I might not understand or I might not be responsible for the infusion center, but I need to measure it. And even if you just know this is where we're falling down, you're able to, or this is where someone else is falling down, you're able to better allocate resources on your end to make sure that that's a smoother experience for the patients. So that's for the companies on our end that are really focused on it. They do measure those handoffs and how those handoffs go as well.
One final question, Kirk, is there, besides this study, which obviously we have, there's benchmarks to compare. Are there any other benchmarks that are available to compare what is good in terms of a patient support services delivery? And is there any consistency in the questions that kind of we've asked over time?
So there certainly is. Exactly as you mentioned kind of when we kicked it off, Sean, this has been, it is a more recent development. The patient support services on the whole is something that's more recent, and then starting to understand we're providing these services, we should be asking about how patients feel about it. That's an even more recent development. So it's something that has been more so in the past 5 years. Over those 5 years, we have had the opportunity to really hone and find these are the questions that's most effective. These are what we should be asking.
And they're organized by case manager, by financial support, by educational resource, as well as even some digital aspects as well.
It's going to depend on the kind of offering you provide, but we certainly look to benchmark with our own customers, and when you have a consistent question set that you've been using, that's the benefit.
Okay, so really appreciate the audience questions. There were a lot more, but we want to be respectful of people's time, and we are going to wrap this up. So we have this slide here.
Yep, absolutely. So there's a lot of drugs. We touched on a few here today, but we spoke to a lot of patients. And so if you have any questions or want to reach out to us more directly, feel free. As we only had the time we had today to cover on everything there.
Right. So join some of these companies. Connect with us. Connect at peoplemetrics.com is how you get in touch. If you'd like to have updates on the new book that I'm writing, you can have that. We have a great blog that we produce regular content on around both the patient and the customer experience. And we're going to be sending you a recording of this webinar, and feel free to pass that along to any of your colleagues or anybody else who you think would be interested in this topic. And yeah, reach out if you have any questions. Really appreciate you spending the time with us today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon or morning wherever you are.